This is the day that I've dreamt about for years. This has been what all that dying on the side of the track has been about. This is the end of the raging pain. This is my one opportunity, my one shot. Walking into this arena is an assault on the senses. The purple and green and red, the crescendo of noise and the haze at the end of the straight where the Olympic flame is burning bright. This is it. This is my chance. I cannot help thinking that if it goes wrong, I'll never get this opportunity again. I might make other Olympics, but it won't be at home and I won't be touted as the face of the games again. This combination of circumstances will never arise again. This is my first time and my last chance. Finally, I realise just how big and scary the Olympic Games are. I follow the other girls to the start and we get into our blocks. It's like that Eminem song goes, one opportunity to seize everything you want. Will I capture the moment or let it slip? And this is an excerpt from the book we're going to talk about today, Unbelievable by Jessica Ennis.
Welcome to Performers, the podcast that takes you into the minds of the world's most extraordinary athletes, coaches, and performers. We're your hosts. I'm Dr. Duncan Simpson, and you've just heard from Dr. Greg Young. As sports psychology experts, we'll guide you through the pages of their autobiographies, revealing the mindsets, strategies, and habits that propelled the world's best to the pinnacle of their fields. Our goal is to help you learn from history's greatest performers. For each episode, we read and condense entire autobiographies into concentrated insights representing over 20 hours of work per episode. You gain not only the collective wisdom of these elite performers, but also access to over 30 years of our professional expertise in sports psychology. Listening to this, you're saving countless hours while accessing the distilled wisdom and proven strategies of the best in the fields. So, Greg, tell the listeners a little bit about Jess Ennis.
Jessica Ennis is a celebrated British track and field athlete renowned for her accomplishments in the heptathlon and in the 100 metres hurdles. So here are some of her notable achievements. European Championships 2010 Barcelona, she was a gold medalist. World Indoor Championships in 2010 in Doha, gold medalist in pentathlon. Commonwealth Games 2006 in Melbourne, bronze medal in heptathlon. She's a former British record holder in the heptathlon with 6,955 points. Bonus points for anyone who understands what that actually means. She set a British record in the 100 metres hurdles with a time of 12.54 seconds. In the World Championships in 2009 in Berlin, she had the gold medal in heptathlon. In 2011 in Daegu, South Korea, she initially awarded the silver medal, but later got upgraded to the gold after the disqualification of the original winner following a drugs test. In 2015 in Beijing, she won the gold medal in heptathlon. In terms of her Olympic achievements, in 2012 in the London Olympics, she won the gold medal in heptathlon. And in 2016 in Rio de Janeiro, she won the silver medal in the heptathlon. In terms of other honours, she was appointed a member of the Order of the British Empire, an MBE, in 2011. She was promoted to the Commander of the Order of the British Empire, a CBE, in 2013. And then she was further elevated to the Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire, which made her a Dame, in 2017. And that was all for her service to athletics. So Duncan, just before we get started, this book obviously focuses on the build-up and the London 2012 Games in particular. Obviously, Jess Ennis competed after that point, but the book does end with the London 2012 Games, so that's kind of going to be a natural stopping point for us today.
Well, a very accomplished young lady indeed. So, Greg, why don't we dive in?
Absolutely. So let's hear a little bit about her home life with her mum and dad. Both of us were smacked by our parents, but to be fair, we probably deserved it, and we had it a lot easier than some of our friends, one of whom was periodically beaten with a wooden spoon. I think parental discipline is very important as long as you understand the reasoning behind it and as long as it goes hand in hand with parental love. Mum was a rebel, a wild child, all naughtiness and dyed pink hair. When she was 14, she collected what money she had and went to stay overnight at a friend's house. Unbeknown to my grandparents, they had a grand plan and made their way to the coast where they took a ferry to France and stayed there until the cash ran out. It's that streak which makes her say to me sometimes, "I'm sure you're adopted." We're similar in lots of ways, but she was a troublemaker. My mum also says that she thinks she may have passed on the competitive gene. Dad was quite sporty and like most Jamaican kids, did some sprinting, but mum admits she was competitive on a petty scale. They joke that I'm adopted, but I'm an individual mix of my parents' different personalities and cultures. Duncan, it seemed like she had a loving home life, but her parents were quite different.
Definitely an interesting backstory. It's fascinating how Jessica's upbringing really combines, I'd say, the contrasting influences from both of her parents. On one side, her dad seems to be that steady, disciplined figure who provided the structure, warmth, and maybe a sense of accountability. He was very strict. And he seems to embody that resilience, not only in navigating his own challenging childhood, but also in being that consistent present for Jessica and her sister, despite some hardships that he faced early in life. On the other hand, her mum sounds like quite the character. Definitely had a rebellious streak. I mean, going to France when you're 14 is a wild story. And I think that rebellious streak adds that vibrant and dynamic contrast with the dad. So, in summary, there's this blend of structure from her dad and rebellion from her mum, discipline, creativity. This may have provided Jessica with a unique environment where she could thrive.
So it seems like her mum's competitive push really compelled her to drive Jessica forward and find her feet quickly, but it doesn't always go smoothly for Jessica. She says, in 1993, my parents sent me to Sharrow Junior School. In terms of academic results, it was not the best. But mum was keen for me to go somewhere that had a rich mix of races and cultures. I think she felt that it was more important in those formative years. I now think that it was a shrewd decision because children can be unforgiving about differences, picking them out and using them as sticks to beat you with. So at Duncan, she actually starts to get bullied at school. She says, I was small and scraggy and that's when the bullying started. There were two girls who were really nasty to me. They didn't hit me, but bullying can take on many forms and the abuse and name-calling hurt. The saying about sticks and stones breaking bones but words never hurting falls on deaf ears when you're the school kid in the throes of a verbal beating. At that age, girls can almost be paralysed by their self-consciousness, so each nasty little word cut deep wounds. I went home, cried, and wrote in my diary. Perhaps it would be nice to say that one day I fought back and beat the bullies. But I didn't. It festered away and became a big thing in my life, leaving me racked with fear about what they would say or do next. Of course, Duncan, this is never something anyone should have to go through, but we often talk about the shadow side of things on this podcast. Can we flip this situation and see if there are any potential positives, and that's a bit of a stretch of a word, that might have come out of this situation for Jess? Maybe some parallels that we've possibly seen with some struggles of other performers?
Greg, while bullying is never something anyone should have to endure, and we certainly don't want to glorify it here on Performers, Jess's experience might have contributed to her resilience and emotional strength later in her career. Facing those challenges early on likely helped her build some mental toughness needed to navigate the pressures of elite sport. Similar to other performers like you mentioned, perhaps Andre Agassi, who went through a really difficult time, both with his dad and at the Bollettieri Tennis Academy. And the other performer that stands out for me is Jackie Robinson, who had to really endure some torrid racism throughout his career. And these struggles really laid the foundation for the ability to endure adversity and remain composed under pressure. To answer your question, I think these tough moments, as unfair as they were, they may have played a pivotal role in shaping the grit and determination that Jess had, although I'm sure she wished she'd never had to face them in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, that's a very negative situation, but I think you've highlighted some of the potential positives in there quite nicely. So obviously she started dreading going into school, as anyone who's being bullied most likely would. But then she gets the first taste of sport. She says, around that time, my mum saw an advert for a summer sports camp at the Don Valley Stadium in Sheffield. It was my first taste of sport, and it would be the first tentative steps towards fighting back and getting my own quiet revenge on the bullies. So by her own admission, Jess was a bit of a whirlwind and always constantly on the move and wanting to move on to the next thing, which made her a lot to deal with for her mum. And she says about her mum, she was at her wit's end in the summer of 1996. So the Aviva Star Track Camp was a godsend. I went down with my sister Carmel and our friends Libby and Eddie. I was anxious because there seemed to be hundreds of kids there, and I sat on the cold stone steps feeling nervous and insecure. The abiding memory of that first day now is the smell of the track. It's hard to describe, but it's so special. Not a sweaty staleness, but something unique to athletics. I dragged it in and never forgot it. Before long, I was smitten. There were a range of coaches there, and we were split into different groups and spent 2 weeks trying all different events. For someone prone to a short attention span, it was varied and fun. When the sun came out and baked the infield, there were water fights and a lot of laughs. This is when I made friends with Lorna, and we were both completely hooked. So Duncan, I think we're seeing a bit of a lightning bolt moment here, falling in love with track and, in fact, the track, and some perhaps much-needed social connection.
This moment does feel like a turning point for Jess, and as you said, a true lightning bolt that not only introduced her to the sport, but also offered her a sense of belonging that she desperately needed because she wasn't getting that at school. The Don Valley Stadium, which is incredibly famous in Sheffield, England, provided more than just that introduction to athletics. It was a place where she could explore her potential and experience joy in a way that contrasted sharply again with those challenges that she faced at school. You mentioned, Greg, that sensory memory of the track and the excitement of trying different events speaks to how deeply this moment really did resonate with her. And as you said, a lightning bolt moment, it seems to have transfixed her. And it was her real first taste of the sport, and it's such a powerful first taste. Equally important, as you heard, she mentioned numerous friends, is that social connection that she found there. The combination, Greg, of discovery, of freedom, and connection may have planted that seed for future success, not just as a world-class athlete, but as someone who can channel adversity into something productive and meaningful. It really is the start of the story, and we've seen this before in great performers, finding their passion and community as they rise above their struggles.
Wonderfully put. I do want to put out a public service announcement. I just realized as I was reading back through that last paragraph, we're going to say athletics a lot here. So in the UK, athletics is what track and field is known as in the United States. So obviously Jess is still young, still a bit shy, and she makes the step up to the quote unquote big school, but she's still not very confident as a person, and she even gets frightened when her dad sends her to go and get a newspaper from the local corner shop. But she was finding her feet in athletics, and as we know, talent often gets noticed. Sport was becoming an outlet for the insecurities, and I found I was good at it. Mick Thompson and Andy Bull were two of the star track coaches who first thought there might be some semblance of some ability. They said they could just tell. You watch children running, and they all do it in different ways, but some of them are fluid and natural.
Greg, there's one sentence that stands out there. Sport was becoming an outlet for the insecurities, and I found I was good at it. That sentence really captures that transformative realization for Jess. Sport became more than just an activity. It was a source of refuge and then also a source of empowerment for her. For someone grappling with those insecurities, discovering something she was naturally good at likely provided, I think, that sense of control and self-worth that she'd been missing. She was afraid to go to the corner shop by herself. It's a powerful reminder of how sport can serve both as an emotional outlet for someone and also a platform for personal growth, allowing individuals to redefine.
So she's obviously finding her feet in sport, but she says, I was not cut out for team games. There was a nice sense of camaraderie, and I liked the fact that we were all in it together, but I much preferred being in charge of my own destiny. One of the teachers, Malcolm Rogers, is now an athletics official, and he would say things like, it's 3 weeks until sports day, so make sure you all support Jessica. By year 7, when I was 11, the PE teachers Chris Eccles and Rick Cotgreave said they felt I could be something special. I was high jumping well then, despite my size, and it was not long until I was out jumping older boys, and naturally, they hated that. Nobody likes being beaten by a girl. One boy would keep bugging me to race him. I would refuse. I was training twice a week at Don Valley now, and in 1998, I joined the City of Sheffield Athletics Club. I figured that I was training on a proper track and taking it seriously, so why should I take a step down and take on some boy with a dented ego? Duncan, it seems like we're almost starting to see Jess develop an athletic identity here.
By this stage, there's great encouragement from her teachers, and the respect that she's getting from her peers now shows that her abilities are starting to become undeniable. Joining the City of Sheffield Athletic Clubs in 1998, I think, further solidifies her commitment, marking this key step on her journey, Greg. Jess isn't just participating anymore, she's embracing the identity of an athlete who takes herself and now her training seriously. There's that quiet defiance, refusing to race a boy with a bruised ego. I love that. It's a subtle yet really powerful moment, signaling a kind of a sense of confidence, and she's no longer trying to prove herself to others, but instead she's focusing on her own growth and her own goals. So yes, absolutely, we can see this athletic identity really starting to take shape nicely.
I think it was probably for the boy's best interest that he didn't race Jess, because I'm pretty sure that he was going to get smashed either way. So obviously, as I said, she continues to get better and better, and she begins to be coached by a guy called Tony Minicello, who goes by Chell. Jess wins the junior girls high jump title at the English schools competition in the year 2000, and as she's getting older and starting to dedicate more of her time to athletics, she starts to see a conflict, as most young people do, with a social life. So, simply meeting friends in Sheffield and going for McDonald's and a walk around HMV, which for those of us that are old enough to remember HMV, that's an old record shop, it became less and less frequent. And as she got older, inevitably the social scene in England, it changes. And I can tell you that from experience, as I'm sure you can, Duncan. She says, it was still a difficult situation as quite a few of the girls were older and started going out a lot. There were lots of parties and my friend would get exasperated with me. Oh, come on, you're always training, they'd say. I was, and it was hard, but I already knew at the age of 15 that I wanted to be an athlete. I had fledgling ideas of being a chef or a journalist, but deep down I knew that, for some reason, I wanted this. All I want to do is be top of the podium, I told my parents. You will be, they said, but when? One day soon. By the sixth form, I was training every night and competing at weekends. It was relentless. I've kept my friends from school, but we were doing different things then. My friends generally had more money than me too, either because their parents would help or because they could go out and get part-time jobs, but I struggled for time and money. It was my choice to do this, but I also felt as if I was missing out. Duncan, it's been a while since we mentioned that age-old debate on performers about sacrifice and investment. Is this a version of that?
Greg, I'm absolutely going to get to your question. But first of all, I want to point out that she won the English Schools Championship in high jump at 15. And I believe Jess Ennis is 5'5".
It is crazy. Some of the events that she really excels in. Yeah, high jump is definitely one of them.
She was an English Schools champion at high jump at 5'5". Okay. Well, back to your question about sacrifice and investment. Yes, I think this is a classic example of sacrifice versus investment. Jess is obviously making those deliberate choices at such a young age, and she's prioritizing, as she says, her athletic ambitions over those typical teenage experiences of socializing. While it's easy to view these decisions as sacrifices, missing out on parties, casual outings, going to, record shops, HMV. Some of our listeners might not even know what records are, but
That's a good point. You could buy CDs there. They did move with the times. It wasn't just vinyl and gramophones.
yeah, they did have CDs. But obviously, she's investing in her bigger dream. So her statement, all I want to do is be on top of the podium. I think that underscores the clarity of her purpose, a willingness to delay gratification for that long-term goal. And we've seen that over and over in our performance journey, really investing in themselves and that dream. I come back to this statement. Everyone wants to be great until they know what it takes. Jess seems to know what it takes.
I just realised that we might have to tell some of our younger listeners what CDs are as well, but I'm just going to leave them. I'm just going to leave them to Google that one.
We're dating ourselves here.
Yeah, it hit me like a steam train there. Though then people might not know what a CD is. Yeah. Anyway, here we go. So our coach Chell likes to refer to Jess as a quote unquote reluctant athlete, and there's a day where Jess pretty spectacularly sheds that, and we've painted this picture that she didn't go out and drink and didn't go out and party, but she most certainly did a little bit of that. And after a house party where she did a little bit too much drinking and, in her words, crashing out, here she speaks about the drive to a competition with her granda the next day. We drove to the track at Woodburn Road in silence, and I could tell how annoyed he was. I got changed, and then I was sick again. I saw Chell and tried to hide my condition from him. It was a horrible feeling, and I realised I could not do both now. I had to choose between athletics and a normal teenage party-going lifestyle. It was the day I decided the sacrifice was worth it. There would be time for partying later on, and I didn't want to look back with those regrets. From that day on, I would not even go out before a big day's training, because I knew that I wouldn't get the maximum from the session. I swallowed my pride, walked out on the track at Woodburn Road, somehow jumped a personal best in the high jump, and that was the end of the reluctant athlete. Duncan, sometimes you've just got to take a big leap forward and hope your pants don't rip.
I like that one. Well, I mean, first of all, I can't blame Jess. Sheffield's a great night out, so I've had many a good night out in Sheffield, so I understand it. But, this moment really marks Jess's full commitment, leaving behind, as you said, that reluctant athlete. So Jess is just feeling the consequences of her choices here, and she's being pushed to decide. It's either athletics or that typical teenage lifestyle. And I've said it before, you can have it all, but you can't have it all at once.
So maybe we'll have to do a bonus episode of the hotspots of Sheffield nightlife.
Oh, there's a few. We'll bring in Lee Morris for that one.
Is that going to be a longer podcast?
That'll be a long podcast. But yeah, there's definitely some good times.
I bet there's some dodgy times as well, if it's anything like I know. So obviously she, like we said, she's performing well despite her drinking escapades, and she's continuing to develop as an athlete, but she doesn't actually feel any additional pressure to do that from her parents. She says, "My parents have never really been ones to intervene. They are the antithesis of pushy parents so prevalent around sports and schools. Chal and I would go to the English schools competitions and be amazed at the pressure heaped onto kids by their parents. Many would scream at them and berate them if the times did not add up. It was sad to see and made you understand why so many dropped out. In fairness to Chell, he always had a long-term plan. Many coaches want the reflected glory of their athletes' trophies and titles, but Chell was never like that. He was in it for the long haul and said that the plan was not to make me a great junior, but a great senior. For someone with an impatient streak, that was hard to grasp, but I'm glad that I didn't have a coach or parents living out their dreams through me and driving me headlong towards burnout. Duncan, I'd love to hear your reflections here, not only as a sports psych expert, but also as a parent and as a coach.
Well, from a professional lens, this approach really aligns perfectly with what we know about long-term athlete development. Pressure from pushy parents or short-sighted coaches often leads to burnout and dropout, as Jess observed firsthand. Her parents' actually hands-off approach and Chell's long-term vision provided the ideal environment for what I'd call sustainable growth. As a parent and a coach myself, this does strike a chord. There's got to be that balance between guiding kids and letting them take ownership of their own journey. Like we said before, nobody does it alone. So young athletes simply cannot navigate their high performance journeys without some guidance and support, and ultimately coaching from adults in their life. But the crucial message to all parents is not to live your unfulfilled dreams through your own children.
I couldn't say it better myself. Absolutely, let children be children. I love that. I love that line that you said there. Letting them take ownership of their own journey. I think that's really, really important. So this doubling down on training and becoming an athlete obviously leads to more opportunities for Jess. She says, I started competing abroad, getting picked to represent Great Britain in a 4-team challenge in Switzerland when I was 16. The heptathlon was becoming my focus now, and I liked it for the variety and the challenge of trying to do 7 events. I scored 5,194 points and came second. It was a nerve-wracking experience being away from home, but I was managing to bottle the fears. I still felt intimidated when I saw the bigger, more muscle-clad girls at the start, but I was measuring myself against myself, previous scores from previous years, and I felt happier doing that. The strange thing about athletics is that you are up against rivals, but have little power to influence what they do. There can be a good deal of mind games and posturing, but essentially, it's an individual event. You against yourself. Your best versus your inner fears. Duncan, what about that?
Well, a couple of things that stick out for me. First of all, she's representing Great Britain at the age of 16 in the heptathlon. So really mastering 7 events by the age of 16 is pretty extraordinary. So she's up against bigger, more intimidating, fully grown women, as we've seen. But that line that she says that she's really matching herself against herself and not against her competitors. I think at this stage of her career, that's absolutely the right way to go. I think if she looks above and looks across and looks at her peers at this stage, she's going to get overwhelmed. But just comparing herself to herself and setting those little goals, that is the path to mastery for her right now.
Absolutely. And she's obviously directing her attention more towards the heptathlon. So this is probably a good opportunity for us to talk about what the heptathlon is. So the heptathlon is a multi-event event. So it takes place over 2 days with 4 events on day 1. So you've got the 100-meter hurdles, you've got the high jump, the shot put, and the 200 meters. And 3 on day 2. You've got the long jump, the javelin, and it all wraps up with the 800 meters. So Jess talks about how she was better on day 1 than day 2, so decided to focus a little bit more on improving those day 2 events to try and become a little bit more competitive. And obviously becoming a successful athlete or track and field person in England, it's pretty difficult to do due to the systematic underfunding. There's a shortage of quality coaching, probably outdated and inaccessible facilities for a lot of people, and there's obviously cultural and structural barriers that really do limit opportunities for talent development in athletics. So the opportunity to attend college in the USA actually presented itself to Jess as she was getting a little bit older. She says, I had the chance to go to America myself in 2004 when it came to choosing universities. I'd been offered the possibility of going to East Carolina University on a scholarship. I was surprised because all I'd done was go to the World Juniors and World Youths by that point, and I didn't understand how they even knew about me. But I thought I should take a look, so Mum and I flew out there. They invited some of the track girls around to give us the hard sell. They were exactly how I imagined Americans, getting pizzas in, being hugely enthusiastic, and gushing, oh my God, it's so amazing. I felt like it was so different from the British, and in many ways, the whole setup seemed dated. It was just so unlike everything I was used to, and although the facilities were great and Coach Kaiser sends me messages still, I thought it would all feel odd and unsettling. When one of the girls said, and once a month, we get to party, I decided that was it.
Well, this really highlights the cultural gap, doesn't it, Greg? For Americans, once a month partying sounds like an exciting perk, but But for us Brits, that sounds like prison, to be honest. Once a
Yeah,
month.
once a month. That sounds like a schedule that I don't think you'd get many Brits buying into, to be perfectly
No.
honest. So she decides not to go to the USA, and she says everyone was pleased. Chell had said to me, "If you go anywhere else, it's not going to work." I knew I had a great setup and that he was a great coach doing amazing things for me. But it was an important stage of my life, and having been with Chell since 1999, I now wanted to assess my options. But with Chell whispering in my ear and Carolina a fading memory, I chose to go to Sheffield University. It might sound parochial, but I love this place. I was made in Sheffield and from the Don Valley Stadium, and where the smell of the track can still transport me back to being a 10-year-old girl sitting on the concrete steps, to the Peace Gardens where I would one day be treated to a civic reception. I feel this city is part of me. Duncan, maybe this is one of our classic sliding doors moments. Sometimes we talk about stepping out of your comfort zone and pursuing something new and shiny. This is the opposite of that. This is staying at home in familiar surroundings and basically just doing what you've been doing.
As Steve Jobs says, you can only connect the dots looking backward. Perhaps for some at this time, the decision to turn down a scholarship in the US might have seemed like the wrong choice, to be honest. You're right, it's opposite of stepping out your comfort zone, but it highlights some wisdom, I think, Greg, in understanding where your comfort zone is. Jess clearly recognizes and values staying in Sheffield, where she obviously has a really strong support system and a coach who truly believes in her long-term potential. Sometimes staying put isn't about playing it safe. It's about doubling down on what's already working. Jess's choice proves that progress doesn't always require those big leaps into the unknown. Sometimes it's about building on the foundation that's already been laid. And it's a great reminder that that kind of new and shiny isn't always the right path to success. And there's nothing wrong with Sheffield.
Very well said. I guess staying put and standing still aren't necessarily the same thing. So she does go to Sheffield University and she decides to study psychology there. She says the psychology of sports is interesting and there's a lot of issues that affect people. It's an elitist, cutthroat world, and it is, inevitably, results-driven. That can lead to a lot of pressure, and even desperate measures. In athletics, eating disorders are not uncommon. I occasionally see people who I can tell are suffering, and I've heard lots of stories about long-distance runners suffering from bulimia and anorexia. It's hard because in athletics, there's a lot of pressure to look a certain way. That's why people need to be careful about the language that they use. So she's gained an understanding of the psychology of sport and performance here. But she starts to realize that she also needs to fully commit and double down on the physical aspects of training here as well if she wants to continue to ascend to where she wants to get to. She says, I was lucky in the sense that I've never had problems with my weight. I've always had a sweet tooth and a big appetite, but my mum was skinny, and so it's more down to genetics with me. However, the flip side of that is that you need to be quite muscly to be a heptathlete. When I started doing sessions in the gym, I just did not want to be good at it. I wouldn't push myself because I felt big muscles were unattractive and none of my friends at school had them. Many girls just don't want to stand out in their teenage years and, apart from when it came to athletics, I was the same. Chell grew frustrated with this attitude because he could see that I wasn't pushing myself. I don't want to lift this, I'd tell him. You've got to if you want to get better. Well, I don't know if I do then. As time wore on, I realized Chell was right, and that, if I wanted to be successful, then I needed to do the gym sessions properly. My perspective changed. If I could be guaranteed to win an Olympic gold medal and had to have big muscles to do it, then of course I would. But as a teenage girl, I was more self-conscious. I wouldn't wear certain things and, to some extent, I'm the same now and will usually cover my arms. I look at myself in the mirror and think I'm a bit butch. But you get to that point where you finally understand that looks don't matter so much. So Duncan, we see some guidance from Chell here. Are there any sort of best practices when working particularly with female athletes around this notion of weight and body type? I know that's a really, really big question.
Yeah, thanks for that grenade, Greg. Well, working with female athletes around the topics of weight and body image definitely requires some sensitivity, but also education. Don't just jump in there. For me, best practices often start with fostering a performance-focused mindset rather than an appearance-focused mindset, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. Chell's emphasis on how strength training could help Jess reach her goals rather than commenting on her aesthetics is really a great example of that. So coaches should highlight, I think, the functional benefits of training and nutrition, what it enables the athlete to achieve, rather than how it might change their body. Ultimately, the goal is to help athletes connect their training choices with the larger aspirations, just as Jess eventually did when she realized her commitment to strength training was to win the Olympic gold.
I like that. So performance focus rather than an appearance focus.
Absolutely.
So let's change pace here. We keep talking about him. So let's have a little bit of a conversation about a relationship with Chell, who, for context, she stayed with for most of her career that spanned over 20 years. She says it's almost hard to remember a time before Chell. We clash as well as complement each other and have a working dysfunctional relationship. He mocks me and I take the mickey. In some ways, we're like an old married couple bound together by history and an affection that neither of us ever voices. The strange thing for Chell is that he started coaching me when I was a 13-year-old schoolgirl. Sometimes he forgets what's happened since, that I've been to university, left home, and become a woman. I'm still that little girl that he used to drive hard. Sometimes that was hard for me because I was a normal girl and wanted to do lots of things. Chell was a coach and he could see the potential, but it was difficult for him when I would come home from training in tears about something he'd said. It was not easy for my parents to sit back, especially when my future as an athlete was hanging by a thread, and there were plenty of days when I didn't want to go training. I stumbled out of the house each morning about 9 a.m. I'm not an early riser. I'm actually a lazy person in many ways. Then I see Chell and we restart our volatile relationship of little feuds. He'd say something sarcastic and I'll bite. We're very different people. I will be basking in the moment, but he's already looking to the next thing. That's good in some ways, but it's also sad and you can't move too quickly. Duncan, what stands out to you about this coach-athlete relationship?
What stands out is really this unique blend of tension and trust that really defines the relationship. It's clear that Jess and Chell have a dynamic where they challenge each other, often clashing, but ultimately it's about pushing one another towards success. That balance between conflict and camaraderie seems to keep their partnership effective, even if it's not always smooth. And I think being effective is what is most important here. Chell's ability to see Jess's potential from a young age and his relentless drive to prepare her for what's next really highlights the importance of a coach who is both visionary and demanding. And I think really importantly has that long-term perspective in mind. What's equally striking is how their history shapes their interactions. Chell still sees shades of the schoolgirl he first coached, while Jess has evolved into a woman navigating her own goals and struggles. And I think that must be difficult for both of them. That evolution, as I just mentioned, brings complexity to their relationship, but it also underscores its depth because they've known each other for so long. The fact that Jess keeps showing up even after difficult days or clashes speaks volumes to the respect and the belief that they have in each other, Greg. I think it's testament to how powerful and sometimes how messy coach-athlete dynamics can be.
So she's now firmly competing in senior events now that junior world has left her behind. She's now competing in the fully fledged senior events. And after struggling in the 2007 Worlds in Osaka, she was still upbeat about her trajectory in the sport, and as were some of her competitors who started to really see her as a serious challenger. The next major event is the 2008 Olympics in Beijing, and her and Chell decide to forego much of an indoor season, instead focusing really on the hard yards and training, so move away from that competing and performing to just doubling down to their training. She says, the focus was all on the summer and China. In Olympic years, the hype is cranked up until it's easy to forget that it's just another competition, the same rivals and the same track. The 2006 Hypo meeting in Goetz would tell me a lot about where I was and whether I was ready. I felt good. I'd worked like a slave during the winter. It had started at the back end of 2007 with dreaded hill runs. We'd go through to Christmas, trekking up and down the big, gradual hill in Chelsea Park in Nether Edge. It was around 150 metres long, and we'd run up and walk back down for our recovery. If we were walking too slowly, then Chell would bark up at us from the bottom and let us know. Pick it up. Too slow. Faster. The boys might go on ahead, but we were all co-sufferers, caked in mud, breath steaming in the freezing air, new aches and pains emerging with each run. We did 3 sets of 5 runs up that horrible hill. Then we would do 2 sets of 4 on the shorter one. A lot of athletes go warm weather training in the winter, but I never saw the need. I figured that braving the elements of South Yorkshire was more likely to get me battle hardened for Beijing. We would shiver in the cars we were driven back to the English Institute for Sport for a cup of hot chocolate and then a weight session in the gym. That was our Sunday. I would look at the people getting up late and buying the papers for a long leisurely read and get jealous. The sessions inside the EIS were just as bad. The lactic acid filled the muscles and made my legs feel leaden. It was not just my legs either. The acid got into my arms, my bum, my hamstrings. It spread like a black stain until it was constant, and then I would feel this crushing pain behind my eyes. I've got lactic acid in my brain, I told Chell. He shook his head and walked past me as I died quietly on the floor. As usual, I'd felt the lactic build up gradually during the session until the one rep where I crossed that line and it flooded through me. In those circumstances, there's nothing you can do. You can't feel your legs or your arms. A few of the girls in the group threw up. That happened every session. Their bodies had conditioned them to be sick when they felt the lactic. I hated being sick and never got to that point, so I held it in and came apart instead. It's meant to be hard, Chell would tell us. That's the worst it can ever get. He reminded me of that in Gutsis. You've done the work, he told me. It will be painful, but not as bad as that. It turned out he was wrong. Duncan, that's quite a lengthy paragraph there, but I think really shines a light on or really highlights the intensity of really hard training. And it sounds horrendous, but we've heard other performers doing similar things. Why do you think we see this consistency across those top performers?
Well, first of all, there's nothing horrendous about Yorkshire, Greg. Let's get that straight. Yorkshire's God's country. But to get to your question, what stands out is this universal principle among our top performers that greatness just demands embracing discomfort. There's no way around it. The consistency we see across elite athletes stems from their willingness to push their limits, both physically and of course mentally, because they understand that suffering in training really prepares them for that battle ahead. What's also consistent is that mindset shift that comes with these experiences. As we've mentioned, athletes like Jess Ennis, Des Linden, Lance Armstrong, Chrissy Wellington really internalize that idea that this is the worst it will ever get, which reframes competition as, I think, less daunting by comparison. It's really that psychological edge born from knowing that you survived the hardest moments in training, as Jess just mentioned. The pain becomes, I think, a rite of passage, a shared language almost amongst elite. And it's why this level of work is non-negotiable for anyone aspiring to be an elite performer.
So Duncan, of course, when things are just moving along nicely and she's getting really heavily involved in training, she suffers an injury. And obviously this is a huge challenge. And it's something that happens during a competition. And after she's had an MRI, she finds out you have a stress fracture in your navicular and a stress fracture in your metatarsal, he said. In total, I actually had 3 fractures. I couldn't believe it. How bad are they? His look told me everything, and Doc, being a clinician, was not one to sugarcoat the truth. You're not going to the Olympics, he said. It blew me away. All my family had been telling me it would be okay, and deep down, I'd been convincing myself of the same. Neil gave me a hug, and I had to leave to get some tissues, but there was more to come. It's a serious injury, Doc said. Then he told me my career might be over. I was 22 years old and potentially finished. I cried some more. I went back to my cell-like room and felt like a condemned woman. I rang my parents and Chell. I could tell from his voice that he was really upset. Duncan, that's a tough read, and injury for any athlete at any point is very, very difficult. But to have it obviously just prior to an Olympic Games, that just adds insult to injury.
Greg, it is a devastating blow for any athlete, but for it to happen just before the pinnacle of competition and for the Olympics for Jess, I think just magnifies that heartbreak. You know, the next time it's coming around is going to be in 4 years when she's 26. That seems like a lifetime in an elite athlete's career. So Jess's situation, I think, perfectly encapsulates that emotional roller coaster of elite sport where years of preparation and sacrifice can feel like they're undone in an absolute instant. And that psychological toll of not just missing the Olympic Games, but also being told her career might be over at 22. It can only be overwhelming, to be honest, in that moment. It's a stark reminder of how fragile even the best laid plans can be in the face of injury, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. Injury doesn't really care what your plans are, to be perfectly frank, does it? Jess, she talks in the book about the outpouring of support that she got from people around her and from the GB athletics community. So she's feeling this really high level of support from the people around her. She says, there were so many flowers in the house that it looked like a funeral parlour. It was hard not to wallow in self-pity or become consumed by a flood of what-ifs and why-me's. I knew that everyone got injuries, that they were part and parcel of an athlete's life. But to devote your life to something and have it snatched away was a bit like suffering a bereavement. You've lost something that's part of you. It's devastating, heartbreaking. So what's this process of actually being injured like for an athlete? So Jess explains some of her challenges. She says, I could see myself literally fading away. As an athlete, you work so hard to build yourself up, but I could see my leg getting thinner and thinner. I was forced to watch myself go backwards while all the talk in all the papers and on the TV was about those athletes who were in the shape of their lives and were going to go for medals in Beijing. There was the boredom as well as the depression. I went on the internet and got even more down via Google search. I read for hours and found lots of examples of people who had suffered with the same sort of injuries for their entire careers. It's definitely not healthy to use the internet to diagnose yourself. It's certainly unlikely to cheer you up. So her physio, Ali, had already helped a lot, not only with her expertise, but also with her attitude. She said she thought things happened for a reason. I believe that too. I'm not religious, but I am fatalistic. I believe you have a journey in life, but I don't believe that it's all out of your control. I also think you have to be able to blame external things sometimes. If you constantly blame everything on the internal, then it's very hard to get over a disappointment. I don't mean you always want to be able to say that it was the fault of the weather or the track, or that you didn't perform at your best. And I'm not advocating passing the buck, but it helps if you can look outside of yourself. Duncan, there's a lot to reflect on here, and obviously the physical component of injury is a huge part of being sidelined, but the psychological is often, unfortunately, overlooked.
As you mentioned, there is a lot, and I think Jess's experience highlights just how multifaceted the challenge of injury really is. Physically, she's watching her body change and lose that conditioning she's put in hours and hours to get to that physical point where she's ready to be at the Olympics. For athletes, their physical capabilities are often intertwined with that sense of identity that we talked about earlier. So to see this diminish can only feel like she's almost losing a part of herself as that kind of muscle wastes away. On the flip side, on the psychological side, Jess captures that emotional toll of the injury. There's boredom, I think frustration. There's a spiral of self-doubt exaggerated by Googling. Probably stay away from WebMD if you're injured, that's for sure. Her physio's perspective on fatalism offers an intriguing insight into resilience here. Believing that external factors play a role allows an athlete to create some emotional distance from setbacks, potentially preventing a spiral of self-blame. So really, when we look to external factors, we can detach ourselves from the injury itself. I think that can be a technique we can use. At the same time, Jess is reflecting on balancing this belief with accountability is absolutely key. It's not about avoiding responsibility, but also recognizing that setbacks don't define you entirely. It's devastating, both physically and mentally, Greg.
So the injury that she has, as I mentioned, for those of you that aren't medically inclined, it's an ankle injury. So coming off the back of that ankle injury, her coach, Chell, sees the opportunity to make some technical changes. She says, Chell dropped his own bombshell as we did a long jump session. Why don't you change your takeoff foot, he said. I laughed incredulously. No way. Just give it a go. No. The idea of having to change my takeoff foot was simply awful. The long jump was an event I was already struggling with, and now, on the comeback trail, with the World Championships looming, he wanted me to reprogram my brain. The problem was that I would charge down the runway and stick out my right foot as if it was the high jump. That acted as a brake, and it would arc me into the air rather than through it, and that meant I was dropping short. Chell described it as it educating the neural pathways to get the left foot to behave differently. I want you flying like a plane off the end of an aircraft carrier. I was reluctant to change it though, as I thought it would only make things worse. People spend years training to make things instinctive, so then to go back to basics and rebuild it from scratch sounded daunting. Yet, in the back of my mind, I was scared about the injury too. I wanted to jump like I had before, but it was only now that I considered the force that went through the body with every jump. I thought, what if I never master this event? If this doesn't go right, then I've wrecked everything. So, reluctantly, we started to rebuild me. The injury had given me little choice. I had to protect the broken foot, and so I worked slavishly to get used to jumping the other way around. Duncan, sometimes necessity is the mother of invention. Are we seeing a really brave move here from a coaching team, or just an act of self-preservation due to the injury?
It's a fascinating blend of both for me, Greg. On one hand, there's a clear necessity driving the decision. It is about protecting Jess's injured foot and ensuring that she can continue competing without risking further damage. But on the other hand, this move also reflects a lot of bravery, I'd say, and some foresight from her coaching team to take that risk. She is successful, but they're taking a risk to really trying to elevate her to the next level. So what stands out is that willingness to take that daunting step during a really critical period just before the Worlds, and asking an elite athlete to essentially rewire the neural pathways and rebuild that fundamental skill is no small task, especially, like I said, with a major championship looming. It perhaps speaks to Chell's confidence in Jess's ability to adapt and his belief in this long-term benefit that might outweigh the short-term risks. For Jess, reluctantly embracing this challenge also shows her resilience and trust in her team, even when the stakes and the doubts were sky high. I mean, what about your long jump record?
My long jump record's probably as far as I can trip falling forward, I think. So like maybe 6'5". I don't know. What's that in meters? Maybe 2 meters.
Well, you need to change your approach.
Yeah, that's why I never succeeded. I've been taken off on the wrong foot all this time.
Exactly. There
That's
we
it.
go.
It's got nothing to do with being slow and heavy and, yeah, not athletic. Turns out I'm on the wrong foot. So she heads into the World Championships in Berlin in 2009, leading the world rankings. And going into the final 800 metres, Chell advises Jess to run at a steady pace, reminding her that she's got a comfortable lead. However, she went out too fast running the first lap at what she calls a specialist's pace, so a specialist 800 metre runner, not a multi-eventer, and she starts to feel the lactic acid kicking hard. Despite the intense pain, when Dobrinska overtook her on the final bend, Jess managed to dig deep and remembered all the grueling sessions that we talked about that prepared her for the moment. She was able to fight through the agony of the lactic acid, and she surged ahead, reclaimed the lead, and won the race, and ultimately the gold medal. So obviously, doing so well, being world champion, she begins to get more and more fame and more notoriety. And as anyone in the UK knows, that means more press intrusion into both her family and her family's lives. And a glimpse into what will come in the following years. So during this time, head coach of UK Athletics, Charles Van Comeny, wanted Jess to move down to London to train, so to leave that Sheffield base that she's been there for a long time, that she even gave up the opportunity to go to university in America. He wants her to come down and train full-time at one of the bases down in London. She says, I couldn't understand that. I won the world title and everything was working perfectly. Moving to London would have been the worst thing for me. I had a nice home in Yorkshire, but they wanted me to go and live in an athlete's house, which would have been like going back to university and living in halls. Charles said I would have everything I needed at the centre, but it wasn't just about that. Andy had a job in Sheffield, and my family and friends were all there. I like to have separation in my life and do things outside of sport. He didn't get it. I don't like conflict, but if it's something that I'm passionate about, then I'll put my foot down and argue until the sun comes down. Eventually, he saw where I was coming from, but he still wanted me to move and try to get Chell's job based down there to force it. I'm loyal to you, Chell said. If you don't want to go, then we don't. We didn't. I'd never even competed in London, and it would have been bad for me professionally and personally. I was world champion and wanted to walk my dog with Hannah and have friends round for dinner. It was all so unnecessary. Duncan, it's interesting that at this point UK Athletics wanted to really change that winning formula and make this shift. How important for you is it that athletes find this balance and this separation between sport and life?
Jess's story perfectly highlights how crucial that balance is for elite athletes. That separation between sport and personal life helps maintain, I think, for her, mental well-being, and also prevents burnout. For Jess, staying in Sheffield wasn't just about comfort, as we mentioned before. It was about having a life outside of athletics where it sounds like she could recharge and spend some time with loved ones and keep that sense of normalcy, even though she's a world champion and very well recognized at this stage. That balance can be the difference between thriving in the long term and burning out under constant pressure. What's surprising here is the push to disrupt that system that's clearly working. I just don't get that. And Jess has become world champion, and the idea of uprooting her, really, there's a risk of destabilizing that foundation that she's built. Again, a very strange choice by Charles. Again, I'm sure he's very well qualified, but a strange choice. So it's a reminder that in elite performance, it's not just about facilities and training programs. It's about supporting that whole person, not just the athlete. And separation and balance is absolutely crucial.
I believe that he's Dutch, so it might have been an inside job. I think he might have been trying to take UK Athletics down from the inside. You never know.
Sneaky Dutch.
Charles, man. Taylor's all his time. So she's actually made the team captain. You mentioned she's getting more and more recognised. She's made the team captain for the 2010 European Championships, and of course, again, it adds additional media commitments and again heightens her profile. And it's a role that she actually described as a quote unquote a burden. And there was some commitments that came with it, like she had to stand up and give a speech, and there was poetry and all sorts of stuff in there. And it feels at times this could just be a distraction for someone who really doesn't want the role. But with that said, fortunately, she is able to put that burden to one side and win the heptathlon, making her both the world and European champion. And with the 2012 Home Olympics in London only 2 years away. So we're starting to see some really great momentum being built. But of course, as sure as night follows day, and as we've seen with many of our performers, fame and sponsorship follows athletic success. And that's no different for Jess, and it obviously leads to many exciting opportunities. But despite all of the glamour, training doesn't stop. And unfortunately, she suffers an Achilles injury but has a real focus on returning stronger for the World Championships in Daegu, South Korea in August 2011. But she's always got that London 2012 Olympic Games sitting in the back of her mind. She says, "It was now less than a year to the Olympic Games, and every countdown had been marked in the media. 1,000 days, 2 years, 500 days, 1 year, tick-tock. The truth is I was more concerned with the moment and Daegu. London was the end game, but you had to put yourself in a position to win it, and that would be decided now. I'd drive past 5 big posters of me on advertising hoardings on the way to training. It was still hard to take in. It was growing, but I had to back it all up with results. The pressure to defend my world title was raised with every billboard." It's really interesting, Duncan. She starts to see her face everywhere. And actually, she goes or wants to go into a chip shop and sees her face on an advertising board in a whole athletics garb and decides not to go into the chip shop and get food for it. Maybe that's the way to stop people going in chip shops. Put their face out.
I wouldn't have stopped me. I love a chippy.
I would have flown in there as well. So, not only the distraction of advertising, but she says, "My journey into the surreal reached a new peak with the news that I'd got an MBE in the Queen's birthday honours. Deep down, I thought things like that didn't happen to people like me. I was just Jessica Ennis, the same woman from Yorkshire I'd always been, with the same friends, same motivations, and same beliefs. But I also know that there was now another Jessica Ennis, the one on the billboards, the TV, and soon at Buckingham Palace."
Greg, this is such a pivotal moment where Jess's life as an athlete begins to intertwine with her growing public identity, yet her reflections show that duality that she's grappling with. There's the grounded Jess from Yorkshire versus the larger-than-life Jessica Ennis being celebrated and scrutinized on the national stage. And I think this duality also amplifies the pressure she felt. Defending the world title wasn't just about personal achievement anymore. It's about living up to expectations tied to that public image, as she mentioned. What stands out is Jess's ability to stay focused and present, really prioritizing Daegu over the distant goal of London 2012. It'd be so easy for her to jump ahead and think about London. And it's a reminder that managing external expectations while staying true to yourself is one of the toughest balancing acts an elite performer can have, especially when that spotlight grows brighter and brighter.
So, pop quiz for you here, Duncan. Can you remember the most notable moment from the 2011 Daegu World Championships?
I'll take sprinters for 500, Greg. Who is Usain Bolt?
Correct, but what about him? That's just a man. What did he do?
I believe that was the controversy over his false start at the World Championships.
That's correct.
The big hot favourite and false started.
He was, and obviously with a false start back in the day there, they disqualified you. So he was disqualified from what we assume he would win as the 100 metres. So Jess is actually competing the next day. And she says the next morning, Monday, 29th of August, it was my turn. I was the first in the heat in lane 2, flanked by Hylias Fountain and Jessica Zelinka. Both good hurdlers. Before the first event, you start to think, don't fall over, don't false start. Then I banish that negativity. I think do's, not don'ts. I felt good and I was running well, shown by my time in Loughborough. Just repeat that and I would be in good shape. But in the hurdles, there's a lot that can go wrong and my timing was ever so slightly out. A small mistake with big consequences. I clattered into a couple of hurdles and it knocked me off my pace. I was really annoyed and crossed the line seething with frustration at not having made the most of an opportunity. Fountain won the heat and I was second in 12.94 seconds. Dobrinska and Chernova both set personal bests in their heats. Already, it looked as if it was going to be tougher than ever. So Duncan, she actually talks about being on the start line and thinking about that false start from Usain Bolt. That's why I bring that up. It's interesting that it's completely irrelevant, not related to your event at all, but can still sit in the back of your mind. But I do want to get back to this idea of something that I really love. It's that idea of do's versus don'ts. How can listeners apply that to their performance worlds?
It's a really powerful strategy for all high performance situations. Thinking about don'ts like don't fall or don't false start often leads to hesitation and mistakes as it primes our brain to focus on what we're trying to avoid. So shifting to the do's, as she says, like do keep your rhythm, do stay balanced. You create that proactive, positive mindset, I think, that drives action. So whether in sports or presentations, exams, this approach can really reduce anxiety and improves focus, helping you to perform at your best. So Jess's mindset is a great reminder for us to focus on what you can achieve, not what you fear.
I love that. Using your mindset to drive action, do's versus don'ts. Great stuff. So that fact that she clattered into a couple of hurdles, she's actually got a knee injury from that, and that hampers her performance. And without giving a blow-by-blow account, it's fair to say that Jess's finest hour wasn't in this World Championships, and she has to settle for silver, or as she puts it, quote-unquote, lose her world title. She says, I gave some interviews and said that it was not about this year, that it was all about 2012, but they were just words. It kills you. In the official press conference, one journalist asked how it felt to have lost the title and had my winning streak ended. It hit home. I said something to the media, but I was on autopilot. More words, as empty as I felt. Then I went back and cried my eyes out. So Duncan, we're following on from Daegu 2011. We're going to jump forward and move on to the big one, Jess's home Olympic Games in London 2012. It's getting closer and closer. She says everyone's tense. We're pretending it's the same as any other season, but it isn't. The closer it gets, the more it affects me. TV adverts are playing with my face on. Andy pauses them and makes a joke. I cringe. This is my one opportunity, my one shot. It's scary. As much as I felt honoured to be talked about as the face of the games, I didn't ask or apply for the title. I'm a bit embarrassed and feel that there are any number of faces of the games. However, I didn't reject the tag and enjoyed a lot of the sponsor and media stuff I did. I wanted people to know my name. But it is pressure, more pressure, rising all the time. Duncan, this fame unsurprisingly comes at a bit of a cost, as much like Ronnie O'Sullivan said, everyone wants to talk to you and get a piece of you. For Jess, this is no different.
So Jess's experience captures that double-edged sword of fame. On one hand, being the face of the games is a massive honour and a platform to inspire others. And ultimately, she probably earned a few bob through her sponsorship dealings. Let's not hide that. But on the other hand, it amplifies the pressure to deliver on the biggest stage if you're the face of the games. For Jess, the constant media attention and rising expectations added to the weight of being that home favourite. And London 2012, it was just such a huge occasion. And the British media, I think they're worldwide renowned for being just over the top in how they treat people and how they really dig into their private life. So I can absolutely understand her at this stage. And I think while she handled it with grace, it's also a reminder that fame can blur that line between being an athlete and being a public figure. More broadly, fame, as we've seen with any of our other performers, often creates that paradox for athletes. It brings opportunities and influence and validation for the work that they do, but it also erodes privacy and the simplicity that many rely on to stay grounded. It really is a double-edged sword.
There's nothing can ruin a British athlete quite like the British media.
Absolutely. It ruined my career.
Yeah.
They took me down.
Yeah. And those were some absolutely shocking revelations that brought you down. I'm glad the media finally got a hold of you.
Yeah, they're not on the internet anymore. That was pre-internet, those stories.
Yeah, pre-internet, pre-camera phones. You're a very, very lucky man.
As we all were.
As we all were. So, despite training the hardest she ever has that winter, she actually goes on to lose her European title in Istanbul, meaning that she's lost her world and European titles in very, very quick successions. She says, Andy did his best to comfort me. You're a consistent winner of medals, he told me on that journey through the crowded streets. If you have a bad day, it's a silver medal. That's not a bad place to be. It actually cheered me up. The whole thing of thinking I'd won and having taken it away from me hurt like hell. But Andy had a way of saying the right things. I'd lost 2 world titles in little more than 6 months. Duncan, one of the things we're seeing consistently here, it's the importance of social support. So previously we talked about other athletes during her moments of injury, her parents and her family supporting her, and now her other half, Andy. And I really like the saying that success has many friends, but failure is an orphan. How important is that social support in these moments?
I really like that saying. I haven't heard that one before. But I think it really highlights the isolating nature of disappointment. But having a strong network like Jess has with Andy and her family and even her coach can make all the difference. When everything feels like it's slipping away, having a support network helps provide perspective and encouragement and a reminder of your worth beyond athletics. You're just a normal person. I think those that have known you growing up really think about you as the person and not so much the athlete. And support isn't just about comfort. It's also to help, as Andy does here, reframe setbacks. I think his line was, your worst day is a silver medal or something like that. I mean, that's amazing. So, quote unquote, social support is absolutely key on our performers' journeys.
I couldn't agree more. So obviously, Duncan, you want to be flying and feeling super confident going into any competition, but in particular into an Olympic Games.
Absolutely.
So well, I know you know that from experience. So this is a bit of a weird one. She says it was May, and I was back at the Great City Games, where I was running the 100 metres hurdles in Manchester City Centre. It was a true test for me because I was up against Dawn Harper, the reigning Olympic champion at the event, and Daniel Carruthers, the runner-up at the World Championships in Daegu. I'd been suffering a bit with a cold, but I ran well. It was one of those days when it felt effortless. I beat them all to the line, and the time, a new best of 12.75 seconds, flashed up. I was ecstatic. But again, just like in Istanbul, it was short-lived. It was my old rival, Kelly Sutherton, watching on TV, who alerted people to the fact that something was awry. Thought 100-metre hurdles was great, but I'm sure there were only 9 hurdles, not 10, she tweeted. She was right. The organisers had only put out 9 hurdles, and so any times and records did not count in the official stats. It was a silly mistake and an unbelievable one. I was genuinely angry afterwards and let my frustration show in the interviews I gave afterwards. I feel let down, I said. I felt like it was a good race. I was running well. I was obviously coming through at the end. Stick another hurdle on there and it would have been the same outcome. But I'm so annoyed. People wondered how we'd not realised we were a hurdle short. But you don't count when you're running. I thought it seemed like a long run to the end, but you're so in the moment that you don't see the bigger picture. I love the event and have never slagged it off, but it was an almighty cock-up. I just wanted things to go smoothly for once.
That is an absolutely crazy situation. 9 hurdles instead of 10.
Come on,
Greg,
you had one job. You had one job.
You literally had one job, put out the right number of hurdles. I mean, to be honest, I wouldn't have known the right number of hurdles, but that's not my job. So, but it's certainly not one you'd expect. And to be honest, I just thought, well, that's just weird. It's just a weird thing to happen. But I guess the takeaway is what's striking is her ability to stay in the moment during the race. She's so focused, she didn't even notice they were missing a hurdle. That's crazy. And I think that does speak volumes for her mental approach. Her reaction afterwards, which is anger and frustration, shows that much of these moments just really matter. Not just the confidence, but also it really matters for the momentum leading up to the games. It's kind of taken a bit of a shine off her performance. And it's a reminder that athletes aren't just battling their own preparation, but also managing unpredictability of external factors. For Jess, this was just another hurdle. It's it was just another hurdle to overcome on her journey to London 2012.
That's scandalous. I think we need to put like a parental advisory on this episode of the podcast. That's a shocking joke.
I had to throw it in there.
Yeah, to throw it in there. Well, they didn't, so you might as well.
Oh.
Yeah, there we go. See what I did there? It's going to be more frustrating for her as well because she's actually a multi-eventer with the actual event specialists here. So it's a great run against great competition that unfortunately just doesn't count. So obviously this is a huge disappointment. They fly out to the hypo meeting in Goetz, which we've mentioned a little bit earlier, for a really, really big meeting, the final heptathlon before the Olympics. And that's when, quote unquote, Fatgate broke and things got even stranger.
You were out there?
I mean, I was on those billboards, right? It was outside a chip shop. So Fatgate was essentially a story that a high-ranking coach had said that Jess was carrying too much weight and was quote-unquote out of condition, which, I mean, that's wild to think that a heptathlete would be out of condition. And the book doesn't say who that was, but I can bet you $1,000 that the coach was a man. So Jess says, I was not bothered about the stories personally. I was happy with how I was performing and I was happy with my body, so I felt secure in myself. I let it wash over me. I didn't want to make the story any bigger. However, it did make me think about the messages that the story was sending out to kids. They probably looked at me and thought I was really skinny. So to hear that people might regard me as fat could create issues. Not for me, but for other people. That did bother me because it's important. So again, this is another layer of distraction here that doesn't need to be there. But despite that distraction, things go fantastic for her in Goetz. She wins the competition with a personal best score. So naturally, this is going to provide lots of confidence going into the big one. And interestingly, Duncan, and surprising to me, they actually had their training camp for London 2012 in Portugal before the Olympics. So that was something that she very much welcomed because obviously the kind of the bright shining lights of fame and notoriety much more concentrated in England than they would be in Portugal.
So you're saying she got too big time for Sheffield? She's moved to Portugal now.
And now I can't tell whether that's a Yorkshire joke or a Fatgate joke. Too big for Sheffield. But listeners, I'll let you decide if you want to email us and figure out which terrible joke Duncan's just made there. I'll leave that one up to you.
No comments about the girls in Sheffield.
Unbelievable. All right. Finally, it's here. London, 2012. She says the Olympic Village was an assault on the senses. From the calm and quiet of Portugal, we were plunged into this swirling mass of noise and colour. From the enormous dining hall to the armed police, it was daunting and overwhelming. For the main part, though, I was taken in the new surroundings. We'd barely dumped our bags when Nicola spied Prince William and Kate Middleton coming into the village. We dropped our bags, ran down the stairs, and strategically positioned ourselves where they couldn't miss us. "Oh, hi, Jess," said William. I thought, this is getting weirder still. Then Kate asked us about the village before Prince Harry piped up, "Not much pressure on you then." Duncan, she's clearly living up to the title of the face of the games, but this must be a mad moment to have royalty just sort of casually say hello. Is this ideal preparation or an additional level of distraction that you don't need?
I love it that it's Prince Harry that's causing bollocks there.
Yeah, it's very, very much on brand for him.
Yeah, it must have felt surreal for sure. The example of just meeting royal family perfectly illustrates that unique pressure on Jess Ennis and being the face of the games. As we said, on one hand, I think these interactions could be seen as a confidence boost. Like, it's validation of her status as a national icon at this stage and a reminder of just the incredible support that she had. Really, the whole nation was behind Jess. That kind of recognition can help an athlete to feel really valued and motivated. As we've mentioned, there's kind of that flip side. And on the other hand, it's undoubtedly, it's hard not to be a distraction. The Olympic Village itself, with its energy and its chaos, it's overwhelming enough without moments like this being thrown into the mix. So it's a stark reminder of the unique challenges that come along with a global spotlight, to be honest.
So the big day arrives on day 2 of the Olympic Games after a 5:50 a.m. alarm and some breakfast. Well, the preparation's over. She says, normally I'm twitchy and feel a mounting sense of anxiety, but this time I felt a strange calmness flowing over me. I thought, that's weird. So let's say that feeling didn't last. They called us up and we walked out through a tunnel and up into the light. For the first time, I realised how big and frightening the Olympics are. I glanced around and was amazed that the stadium was full. Even though I knew they'd sold the tickets, I'd never been to a championship where the morning session was heaving with people and expectation like this. By now I was really nervous. We lined up. I'm always very deadpan on the line before the hurdles because this is where it can all start to go wrong. I didn't even hear them call my name. I didn't know when to wave, but I sensed it. The adrenaline was huge, but the crowd gave me confidence. One shot. Suddenly all the nerves dropped and then I was ready to go. I didn't think negative things. Do's, not don'ts. I was in lane 8 with Hylias Fountain outside me in 9. That was good because she was a fine hurdler. But Jessica Zelinka, another strong athlete in the event, was over the other side of the track on the inside. I'd been annoyed by that because she's a 12.68 runner and you want to be close to the fast girls. We crouched and the roar dropped to total silence. It was that special moment of bated breath and possibility. Then the gun went. It was a blur, but I crossed the line and that was when I heard the crowd again. Before, it had been as if everything was suspended. I didn't know if I'd won because I couldn't see Zelinka. I clocked the time on the scoreboard as I went past, but I was not about to celebrate prematurely. Then, the time and my name did come up on the board, high above the flaming cauldron. 12.54 seconds. I couldn't believe it. I put both hands in the air. It was a British record and the fastest anyone had ever done in heptathlon. Later, someone would tell me that my time would have given me the gold medal in the hurdles at the 2008 Olympics. It was beyond my expectations and I was numb. Duncan, any reflections here?
I mean, a couple of things. A reminder to the listeners, even though she's a really well-seasoned athlete, this is her first Olympics. And there's nothing that can prepare you for your first Olympics. So she's walking out into her first Olympics, which is the home Olympics. I mean, we've talked, a lot about being the face of the games, and you can't help but think she's going to be nervous, as she mentioned. And Greg, the stat that stands out for me is that she set a British record and she would have won gold at the Beijing Olympics in the hurdles as a specialist with her time. And remember, she's a heptathlete. She's got 6 other events to go. That is absolutely mind-blowing.
It is. Speaking of those other events, those other 6 events. So I'm not going to give you a blow-by-blow account of it, but she clears 1 meter 86 in the high jump, beating Dobrinska, who cleared 183. In one of her weaker events, the shot put, she performs what she calls solid with 14.28 meters. And in the final event of that day, day 1, the 200 meters, she crossed the line in a lifetime best of 22.83 seconds, tied for first. So that's a pretty solid day 1, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I mean, that's unbelievable. I mean, I'm just thinking, she's 5'5", and she's got a solid high jump. She can throw a shot. She's fast at the hurdles and the 200. It's mind blowing. Just an all round athlete there.
Well, they do say that the heptathletes and the decathletes on the male side are the greatest athletes in the world. That is the label that's placed upon them. So here she reflects on the process of actually competing. She says, the heptathlon wipes you, the adrenaline, the effort, the pain, the concentration, and even the hours. Normally, I'd go to bed at home around 10 p.m, but the days of competing are long and exacting. And now I was facing the longest day of my life. I tried not to fill my head with too much doubt, but by the time I'd got back to my room after having treatment, an ice massage and food, it was midnight. Normally, I'd switch off quickly, but I couldn't sleep. My legs were restless, and I lay there tossing and turning. It was such a huge moment. Everything was on it, and it was so different to anything else I'd ever done. I didn't go out to the balcony and look at the stadium. I didn't want to look back either. My mind and muscles were twitching, and I remember waking myself up by kicking out of the wall. I don't know what Kate Dennison in the next door room must have thought was going on. Chell was good in these circumstances. He was calm, but sometimes he says things that get me riled. You have 80,000 friends out there, he told me before every event. I knew it was a cheesy ritual for him, but it worked too. When you're in that stressful situation, it's anything that gets you through, for both of us. So Duncan, day 2 arrives bright and early again at 6 a.m. The first event, the long jump, an event she knows could derail the whole endeavour. Remember, this is the one that she changed her jumping foot after that ankle injury. 6.4 metres. I had it ticked off. More than anything, I'd averted a calamity. A crucial event that could have wrecked my dream was done and dusted. There were 2 events left. The javelin, the reason I'd lost the world title in Daegu, and the 800 metres, the most painful event of all. I knew the javelin wasn't a major problem. Some people had hyped it up as being a real issue, but I believed Daegu was a one-off, and I'd been consistent all year and felt confident. So she throws a personal best of 47.49 metres, and she enters the final event, the 800 metres, in first place in the heptathlon. She says, I was 188 points clear of second place. For me, it was not enjoyable. I couldn't enjoy it for more than a few fleeting nanoseconds with so much at stake. People say the journey should be as satisfying as the destination, but it wasn't. I came off the track after the javelin, and I was fighting back the tears because I knew it was so close to the end. So, going into the 800 metres, the final event, she has a plan in place. She says, this is it. I want to get to the front, and I'm going to go out a bit too hard just to stay out of trouble. I don't want to be tripped or spiked or elbowed by those big girls. I'm really close to it now. I can almost taste it, and yet it also seems so far away. I don't look around or think about the journey. The gun, accelerate, faster, flashbulbs, a dull roar. I hit the front. The bell sounds, 1 lap. Little more than 1 minute to complete a 16-year race. I don't want to push too hard because I don't want to blow up. On the back straight, Lily Schwarzkopf overhauls me. She edges in front, and then Chenova also comes past. I can feel Jessica Zelinska closing too as we round the last bend. I think, I've run harder than this in training. I push through the lactic. I've no choice but to run wide as we come into the home straight to get past. It's my only way past Schwarzkopf and Chenova. Tactically, it's not great, but you have to find a way. As I move forwards, I hear the crowd erupt. I feel I'm being carried along. I want to put on a show and thank the crowd for their support. I want it to be a great finish to the 2 days, and I want that feeling of crossing the line first. So I run, and I win. I'm the Olympic champion. I rarely celebrate at all because I feel too reserved. I fell to the floor and the tears came. You'll be aware by now that I cry a lot, but rarely in public. However, this time, the floodgates opened and the relief just poured out of me. Duncan, I love that line. 1 lap, little more than 1 minute to complete a 16-year race. I can't imagine how ending that race must have felt in this moment.
Agreed. That's a great line. It really encapsulates just her journey. 1 minute for 16 years. Unbelievable. And it captures the weight of the moment so perfectly. It's not just the physical race for Jess. It's everything that has led up to it. The sacrifices, the setbacks, the injuries, the doubts, the relentless training in Sheffield, even though it's God's country. To see all this condensed into a single lap must have been overwhelming, both in its simplicity, but also just such significance for her.
And this episode has been brought to you by the Yorkshire Tourist Board. If you'd like to get in touch and fling us some sponsorship money, we're all about it. So here's what that win meant to her. She said, "I came back to Sheffield on a high. A lot of people had said that there's a sense of anticlimax when you finally reach your goal, that attaining all you ever wanted left a strange feeling of emptiness. I was glad to find I didn't experience that at all. I couldn't stop smiling and felt enormous satisfaction and pride. I knew it was the best time of my life and that nothing would ever top it. I now wish that I could have dragged it out and savoured it, because I knew I'd wished it all away." And that's where we'll leave it. But as always, success leaves clues. So Duncan, what are your top 10 life lessons from Unbelievable by Jessica Ennis?
Number 1, harness inner dialogue. Positive self-talk can shift focus and foster success. She says, "I didn't think negative things. Do's, not don'ts." Number 2, learn from mentors. The right guidance can shape your journey and character. Chell was a coach and he could see the potential. I'm glad that I did not have a coach or parents living out their dreams through me. Number 3, failure can fuel growth. Adversity is an opportunity to rebuild and come back stronger. She says, "I cried my eyes out, but the whole thing of thinking I'd won and having it taken away from me hurt like hell." Number 4, cultivate calm under pressure. Composure transforms nerves into performance. She says, "The adrenaline was huge and the crowd gave me confidence. One shot." Number 5, celebrate collective identity. Success comes from support, both personal and professional. That was Team Ennis, all cogs in the machine to keep things rolling. Number 6, find joy in the process. The moments of hard work build the foundation for achievement. This is the end of raging pain. This is my one opportunity, my one shot. Number 7, redefine teamwork. Success requires a trusted team who believe in you. Chell was relaxed and chatting away, and I could sense his excitement. Mick kept saying, "You're going to do it." Number 8, embrace complexity in talent. A multifaceted approach turns raw ability into greatness. The heptathlon wipes you. The adrenaline, the effort, the pain, the concentration. It's such a huge moment. Number 9, create mental anchors. Visualization creates confidence in execution. She says, "I went over every event 6 times in my head, how I wanted them to pan out." And finally, number 10, pride without resentment. Celebrate your own success while respecting others' journeys.
Duncan, a fantastic top 10 as always. And of course, we know that success leaves clues, but it also leaves some cautionary tales. So what are the top 10 things to avoid from Unbelievable by Jessica Ennis?
Number 1, succumbing to external pressure. Stay focused on your goals despite outside noise. Number 2, neglecting mental preparation. Confidence stems from clear mental rehearsal. Number 3, dwelling on failure. Learn from mistakes, but don't let them consume you. She says, "I gave some interviews and said it was all about 2012, but they were just words. It kills you." Number 4, disregarding routine tasks. Consistency builds performance even when tasks seem mundane. She says, "Hill runs were dreaded. We were all co-sufferers, caked in mud, breath steaming." Number 5, stalling in a poor environment. Surroundings matter for focus and growth. Moving to London would have been the worst thing for me. I had a nice home in Yorkshire. Number 6, losing sight of the bigger picture. Stay connected to your long-term vision during setbacks. People say the journey should be satisfying as the destination, but it wasn't. Number 7, underestimating the importance of patience. Long-term success requires enduring the grind. She says, "This is the worst it can ever get." Chell reminded me of that. Number 8, being overcritical of yourself. Self-doubt can undermine confidence and focus. She says, "I could not enjoy it for more than a few fleeting nanoseconds." Number 9, taking success for granted. Each win demands continued effort and focus. I knew it's the best time of my life and that nothing would ever top it. And finally, number 10, focusing only on individual achievement. Recognize the value of those who contribute to your success. Every member of the team played a big part in reviving me during the bitter post-Beijing winter. Thank you so much for joining myself and Greg on this episode. If you enjoyed it, we ask just one thing. Please share this with 2 people in your network, and for that, we are truly grateful. See you next time on Performers.